What happened to the astronaut who was lost in space for 311 lonely days? Sergei Krikalev was born on August 27, 1958, in the city of Leningrad, known as St. Petersburg today. As a young boy, Sergei was all too aware of the intense space race between the Soviet Union and the USA. An outgrowth of the mid-20th, the space race was a series of competitive technological showcases, with each side aiming to prove superiority in spaceflight. As the years went by, Sergei continued to keep his sights set on the stars in his own race for space and gained a degree in mechanical engineering in 1981 from the Leningrad Mechanical Institute. After graduating, Sergei found work with the NPO Energia, the Russian industrial organization responsible for manned spaceflight activities for the Soviet space program. In his early years there, Sergei tested spaceflight equipment and worked as part of ground control for space missions. Sergei was selected for cosmonaut training. This intensive course covered a whole manner of space-related learning, including astronomy, orbital mechanics, and methods of scientific experimentation. Upon completing his training, Sergei finally earned his cosmonaut wings in 1986. In early 1988, Sergei began training for his first long-duration spaceflight aboard the Mir space station, which, at the time, was the largest artificial space satellite in orbit. Launched on February 20, 1986, the overall objective for Mir was to research how the human body reacted to space travel, as well as observational sciences including studies of the Earth's surface. On November 26, 1988, it was finally Sergei's turn to take off to Mir on the Soyuz TM-7 expedition, a joint mission involving both French and Soviet space venturers. The mission came to an end 151 days later on April 27, 1989. With a relatively smooth operation under his belt, Sergei found himself desperate to get back up there, to infinity and beyond. But, unbeknownst to Sergei, his next trip would leave him desperate to get back to Earth. By December 1990, Sergei was already preparing for his second spaceflight as part of the crew for the Soyuz TM-12 mission. On May 18, 1991, Sergei arrived at the Baikonur Cosmodrome, which was famous for being the world's first spaceport to launch rockets into space. The Baikonur Cosmodrome, found in what is now Kazakhstan, had already been the setting for some truly amazing firsts in space travel, including the launch of the first artificial Earth satellite, Sputnik, on October 4, 1957. While Sergei's mission was set to be rather routine, as far as flying into space can be, I guess, unbeknownst to him, in 311 days, he was going to find himself listed alongside Baikonur's most historic travelers. If Sergei believed in omens, then he may have clocked early on that this trip wasn't set to be an easy one. As the spacecraft carrying him, Anatoly, and Helen approached Mir after a 2-day trek to the station, the targeting system failed. Space stations like Mir are all equipped with an automatic docking system which enables two spacecrafts to locate each other and stay in the same orbit. Doing this manually is a threatening affair, and just one wrong move can be fatal. The space station saw 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets every day, and therefore residents would have to block out portholes to plunge the station into darkness as they slept to simulate nighttime. In space, it's really important to keep your strength up as a low gravity takes a toll on your muscle mass. The process of losing muscle, also known as atrophy, has seen astronauts experience up to a 20% loss of muscle mass on space flights, and that's on missions lasting just 5 to 11 days. While being in space certainly has its wonders, life on Mir wasn't exactly a glamorous affair. Not only was this frustrating for the astronauts as they went about their day's work, but it was also a blinking reminder of just how much they had to rely on this faulty technology to breathe and stay pressurized. In other words, to survive. Each flicker must have been horrifying. On top of that, the constant technical mishaps often caused the station's temperature and humidity to rise and fall rapidly and thus became a breeding ground for microorganisms. As a result, the station reeked of mold, as well as spacepilot B.O. Not only that, but Sergei had an awesome crew around him, including his space buddies Anatoly and Helen, as well as 2 other cosmonauts who had been on Mir since December 1990. On May 26, 1991, Helen and 2 of the other cosmonauts completed their missions and headed back to Earth, leaving Sergei and Anatoly to their own mission, maintaining and repairing the station. Sergei's mission was planned to end in October 1991, so he still had 5 whole months left on Mir, and there was plenty of work to do. The most thrilling tasks were the 6 spacewalks that Sergei and Anatoly had planned to complete during their stay to conduct essential repairs and upgrades to the external parts of the space station. In the final spacewalk of the mission, terrifyingly, Anatoly's helmet visor fogged up due to his spacesuit's heat exchanger running out of water. While still tethered to the station, Sergei had to guide his basically blind commander back to safety, and thankfully they made it. However, in August, not far from their mission's end date, everything changed. From his intergalactic point of view, Sergei was able to take a whistle-stop tour through the wonders of the world in just an hour and a half as Mir circled Earth, from the pyramids of Giza to the Great Barrier Reef, to the Grand Canyon. Given how confusing things were becoming in the USSR, getting accurate news was a challenge, and Sergei worried constantly about his family and friends. There were also various amateur radio operators who Sergei was able to speak with. One of these radio operators was American-born Russian-language graduate Margaret Laquinto, who provided him with uncensored news. Little did he know that he and Mir were about to become entangled in the USSR's downfall. As the months unfolded, individual Soviet states began breaking away from the Soviet Union, and by December, most states were independent. By December 26 of that year, the Soviet Union had completely broken apart into 15 different republics, with Gorbachev resigning. Sergei found himself stateless and could only watch helplessly as the nation he'd known on Earth fizzled out. After ringing in both Christmas Day and New Year in outer space, Sergei began to wonder if he'd ever get back down to Earth. With his future, and even survival, growing increasingly uncertain, Sergei could do nothing but continue waiting and wishing on every passing star. Sergei was the only cosmonaut left on Mir, and, if he did decide to leave, it could mean the end of the space station, forever. It seemed that Sergei was caught in his very own spaceman dilemma. Despite the physical and mental toll that his space stay was taking on him, Sergei's sheer determination and commitment to his mission outshone even the brightest star. He remained busily working away to keep Mir going for almost 3 more months. But unlike an ejected, Seuss imposter, Sergei did not spend the rest of his life floating around in space. Help was just around the corner. In March 1992, Germany paid $24 million, in a stroke of political bargaining with Russia, for Klaus-Dietrich Flotte to travel to Mir, becoming the first German astronaut in space. This meant that Russia could finally afford a replacement for Sergei, who by this time, had spent a total of 10 months orbiting Earth, having circled the planet around 5,000 times. Sergei could finally turn his mind to getting his feet back on solid ground and reuniting with. On March 17, 1992, the Soyuz TM-14 crew, including Alexander and Klaus, the German, whose $24 million travel fare had paid for Sergei's trip home, launched from the Baikonur Cosmodrome towards Mir. A week after the new crew arrived, Sergei was finally able to make his way back down to Earth alongside Klaus and his buddy, Commander Volkov. On March 25, 1992, the Soyuz rocket landed at Baikonur. As the doors opened, a small crowd flocked around the landed rocket as a dizzy spaceman as pale as flour emerged. They could just about make out the red Soviet flag on his spacesuit, next to some stitching that read USSR in Russian letters, the last true Soviet citizen. Several men had to help him stand against Earth's gravity and supported him as he placed his feet on the ground, inhaling breaths of fresh atmospheric air for the first time in 311 days. A fur coat was thrown over him and he was able to enjoy a bowl of broth, his first bit of fresh food in almost a year, on his airplane flight back to Russia, to reunite with his wife, Elena, and young daughter, Olga.